In my political past, there was a period of time in the South Carolina State Senate you could recognize a senator for a point of personal privilege. And I guess one of the advantages of having a podcast in your namesake is an opportunity to do things that you want to do. And when we began kind of controlling our own destiny as it relates to podcasts, we thought about a lot of different ways we could integrate our local community. That's going to be a priority. It is a priority. It will always be our priority. We've had a few podcasts published with our CEO of the local hospital and largest employer here, Donna Isgett. We've had Dr. Fred Carter, president of Francis Marion University. We'll continue to try and super serve our local area. But one thing that I've probably more passionate about than politics, South Carolina politics, is Gamecock football. So the next however long it takes is kind of a point of personal privilege for yours truly and being in somewhat control of a podcast. I want to thank our sponsor, and I'll get to our guest here in just a second, but I want to thank our sponsor. I took this idea to Rick Havocost at Micky Fins, and Rick has been a loyal Gamecock financially, emotionally. He rides the roller coaster like a lot of Gamecock fans do, but he's never wavered in his loyal and financial support. So I went to Rick and I said, Rick, we're in the era of NIL, and Gamecock football historically has, let's be honest. As a loyal Gamecock fan, it's kind of been mediocrity personified. And I said, we live in this new world. We live in this in this new era of college football where NILs are going to be a big part of this. And I want to help the Gamecocks be successful in the NILs. Automatically, Rick said, what do you need me to do? And I said, I need a sponsor. And I know how much you love the Gamecocks, USC, and Gamecock football. I need a sponsor. He said, I'm in. Tell me what I need to do. And I said, what I want to do is have a monthly podcast with a representative from Garnet Trust, what I consider to be the premier collective in USC land. And he said, okay, I'm in. Tell me what I need to do. And I said, well, just obviously there's a cost associated with hosting a podcast. He said, I didn't ask you how much it was. Tell me what I need to do. But I want to make sure I give something in return. I'm not out for a free ride. I certainly don't want a freebie. And Rick and I negotiated a deal that he's comfortable with and I'm comfortable with. And Micky Fins One Stop Party Shop is the exclusive sponsor of our monthly Garnet Trust. I guess it's an iteration of those stoplights, but it's really separate of that. It's a monthly podcast that we'll do to kind of update, inform, engage, however big a listening and viewing audience we can find about the NIL era in college football and why Garnet Trust is worthy of your support. Before I get to our guest, I said that once, I'll say it again. I want to thank Havocost. Rick actually gave us some bourbons here, some Jefferson's Reserve single barrel, and this is hand-picked. This is handpicked by the staff at Micky Fins. They do such a great job of taking care of their customers. Got one on the west side of town, one on the south side of town, and soon to be one out on the interstate, 327 near Buc-ee's. Yellowstone, hand-picked collection. I feel bourbon is more of a wintry and tailgating kind of libation. But I would encourage you, whomever out there partakes in libations, you owe it to yourself to go to Micky Fins and make sure they give you the best deal, best service, best quality of product, and they're setting us up so we can kind of, Jefferson's Reserve single barrel. I'm an old school Jeffersonian, and I'm telling you, I've tried this at the tailgate. It makes you want to recite the Declaration of Independence if you take a sip or two or three. And some of these all this is handpicked. It's kind of an exclusive relationship with Micky Fins because of their buying power, because of their presence in that libation and bourbon market in this particular. And bourbon is such a story. It's hard to tell a story about vodka. It's easy to tell a story about bourbon. So we've got some here. I got a couple of bottles here. This and many others. And obviously they've got your traditional brands of bourbon, vodka, whatever libation and booze you're looking for. But they also, on top of that, have these exclusive brands, hand-picked brands, where they partner with these premier bourbons and kind of put their own personal stamp as they send someone from Micky Fins to pick the product, make sure it passes their muster, and And now's a good time for me to introduce our guest. Mark Bonnoitt, been a friend of mine for a long time. Mark's father, Rick's a good friend of mine. When I was talking about point of personal privilege, when I ran for lieutenant governor and got elected, Mark shadowed me one day. And I didn't let him back because I was afraid they'd make me shadow him. He was impressive as a young person, and I still consider him a young person, but he's not a kid anymore. And I'll preface this, Mark. And first of all, welcome, and good to have you here. And you've got a couple of bourbons over there.
I do.
And you know Rick, and you know how Rick supports the Gamecocks and USC.
Absolutely. The Havocos clan has been a big supporter of Gamecock athletics for a long time, and Rick's got a great thing going on with Micky Finn's One Stop Party Shop, and we continue to enjoy some of their libations at tailgates, and hope our fans do as well. But they're the largest distributor of alcohol in the state of South Carolina, I think, and they are actually the distributor of alcohol for Williams-Brice Stadium.
Correct.
Correct.
So they've earned that business.
They have absolutely earned that business.
Nobody gave him that business. They get out and hustle and drum it up and earn it. And I guess this is we could go down the road of so you got Rick helping us here. And I don't want to back all the way up, and I won't tell the entire story because it gets real complicated, and you folks would be bored to death. But there was a moment in time last year that I got asked to get involved in a collective. And I knew what a collective was, but I didn't know how it worked. I didn't have any idea. And out of that came a gathering of a group of like-minded Gamecock fans that felt we understood how important collectives were, how important they were going to be, and an opportunity for us to succeed in places we've historically not succeeded. I'm not knocking the administration. I'm not knocking the fan base. I'm not knocking the team. I'm not knocking the coaching staff. But it's different today, and it's different because the Ed O'Bannon case in EA Sports allows college athletes now to be compensated. And Mark is the director of development with Garnet Trust. I'm on the periphery. Mark and I talk a lot about it. I'm a loyal Gamecock. He's a loyal Gamecock. We talked about Havocos being a loyal Gamecock. But a group of us loyal Gamecocks got together 6 or 8, maybe 10 months ago, and decided we were going to be intimately involved and energetically involved in the collective that is Garnet Trust. So I want to kind of defer to Mark and let Mark talk a little bit about what he was doing, how he ended up here, and kind of why you believe collectives will decide who succeeds or fails in college football in the next 10, 15, 20 years.
Well, Ken, we've kind of switched roles a little bit because I was in politics. Gamecocks was my hobby, and then all of a sudden, in January I started with Garnet Trust, and so the Gamecocks became my job, and I guess politics are now my outside hobby. Politics are your job to a certain degree,
yeah, to a certain degree.
And the Gamecocks are your hobby. So we're in opposite roles, but we got a lot of like interests. But I started with Garnet Trust in January of 2023. Me and my partner colleague Jeremy Smith, he kind of handles the operations side of things. You said I'm the director of development. That's just a fancy way to ask people for money because that's what it takes. But you mentioned collectives. I mean, every school is pretty much every Power 5 school has a collective now, and a collective is a resource, a facilitator to pool money together from fans to help compensate student athletes for their name, image, and likeness, on that particular athletics program. We help anybody from the starting quarterback at South Carolina to someone who's on the women's track and field team. And everybody has, some NIL value to, whether it values in dollar amounts. But I mean, every single one of these student athletes puts, 25 plus hours a week on top of their schoolwork into their respective sport. And sometimes even, they're working a full-time job with their sport and they're still going to school and everything else. And they deserve to get compensated for their name, image, likeness. You've got schools that have started making, upwards of $100 to $150 million a year in college sports. And a large part of that is on the backs of these athletes who are working, time and time again to go out in games, practices, film, meetings, everything else. And so they deserve to get compensated for their name, image, and likeness.
Okay, let's start here, if you don't mind. So Gamecock football has, I said earlier, been historically mediocre. how likely is Gamecock football to remain mediocre if we don't understand the important significance of a collective like Garnet Trust and figure out a way to fund it? Mark, here's my point. When I got involved to begin with, before we passed the baton to you and it became a full-time job for you, I bumped into people who love the Gamecocks. They have given ability, but they don't like it. They like the way things were. The amateur student athlete, the $25 ticket. You touched on the business of college football. Along with the business came a reality and practicality. Student athlete was not going to do that for nothing. So let's go down the road of can Gamecock football succeed if its fan base refuses to accept NIL as the new norm?
I can't guarantee success with NIL support, but I can guarantee failure. If we don't have you asked what the chances of us being mediocre long term. It's really not mediocre. It's poor for the foreseeable future unless we invest into a strong NIL program. Do I think the market corrects itself and makes it more competitive for other schools? Yeah, I think that happens. But it doesn't necessarily guarantee success, but not having it guarantees no success.
So what do you tell the donors of the University of South Carolina who have been unbelievably gracious? What do you tell them when they say, Mark, I want to win, but I just don't like this. I like giving money to the Gamecock Club. I like giving money to the law school. I like giving money to the business school. I'm not sure I want to be a part of this. What is your response to that? Because you understand that things have been a certain way for a long, long time, and this is dramatic change. This isn't a little veer. This is a monumental shift in the way the game operates.
Yeah, I think you got to look at it as an investment. So for the person that gives a full scholarship, I think it's $1,500 a year. I need you to give another $500, right? I need for the person that spends $20,000 a year, I might need you to give another $5,000. For the person that spends $40,000, it's another $10,000, and upwards, right? You've got to look at that. Specifically for the folks that go to games and spend their Saturdays 7 to 10 times a year going to college football games, and then if you add basketball and baseball, which a lot of Gamecocks go do all three to all of that, then it's a significant investment. But to me, it's an entertainment investment. You were doing it for entertainment ability. But how many times you can go see a bad movie? How many more times? How many times are you going to spend money on popcorn and drinks and beer and tailgating and everything else to see a bad performance? Eventually, you'll give up. You'll stop. And and then people say, well, the Gamecocks haven't stopped, for a long time. No, and we've got a little bit of taste of success every time it almost seems that it's going to turn down. You go from being 0-11 to 8-4 the next year and beating the Georgia Bulldogs, and that turns it around a little bit. But we. I think for the folks that, like I said, you're not going to go see a bad movie multiple times, and this is an investment. So you need to give a little bit extra to make sure you're doing your part. If you had every season ticket, not every season ticket holder, if you had every person that came to a South Carolina game, 77,000 people is what the stadium holds, and they give $10 a month, you'd raise about $9.5 million a year. And so for the folks to say, I don't know if that's for me, I'm not asking you to give a whole lot. But you can give a little bit extra on what you're already doing to make sure there's a good product on the field or court.
Okay, let's go down this road, because I believe the problem with college football, I'm not calling college football a niche sport. It's a national sport, but it's no NFL. The NFL allows the worst team to draft first.
Right.
They believe parity is important. They believe the intrigue of the game leads to a more interesting product. The haves and have-nots will never stop. There's no way the University of South Carolina can raise as much money as Texas A&M. They just can't. Up through the ground come a bubbling crude, but it's oil money. So, but why is the NIL and this opportunity good for the game in relation to parity?
Oh, it's great for the game, and that's an argument I tell people all the time. Is that I use this as an example. For the college football playoff has been existent since 2014, so we're coming up on, this is the 9th season this year. Next year be 10 years, and then it's going to 12 teams next year. There have been 4 teams that have what I would call have dominated. Have all been 5 times or more, so more than half of the times in the college football playoff they've been there. It's Alabama, Georgia, Ohio State, and Clemson.
We don't call them that. We call them that bunch in the upstate.
Right. But school in the upstate, right? And They have all been 5 times. There is a really good chance that only one of those 4 teams makes it to the college football playoff. I think you could really argue that if all of a sudden, Georgia slips up in an SEC championship game, Michigan beats Ohio State in the game, as they call it in the Big Ten country, there's a chance that 0 of those 4 teams are in the college football playoff. And that's a wild thing. But I think that it's better for the sport. The college football TV ratings are higher now than they have been in the last 10 years.
It's a more interesting product.
It is a more interesting product. You've got Texas beating Alabama on national TV in front of 12 million people. I think we're watching that. I mean, those are Monday Night Football TV viewership levels. And you've got a team like Florida State who is has traditionally been a pretty good school, traditionally been a good football program, but has struggled here in the last couple of years. And they have invested heavily into their NIL program, and it is paying dividends right now. This is a crazy statistic that I think really just highlights the transfer portal and NIL. And I know we'll probably dive into the transfer portal a little bit later on, but Florida State against Clemson in an overtime game, they had 411 yards of offense. 410 yards of those offense came from a transfer football player. I mean, and that just highlights, yeah, it's an evolution in the game, but it highlights how you can go from, this is not 3 and 4 year building programs anymore. I mean, this is, and don't get me wrong, you still have to have that.
Sure.
But I mean, this is, NIL allows folks to be competitive and more people to be competitive.
Okay, walk me through 2 scenarios. Logistically, how does this work? Can Shane Beamer at USC be involved in negotiating with Garnet Trust and a kid to recruit from a high school or keep him on the roster if somebody else is trying to poach him?
You can't. You cannot use it as a recruiting inducement. So I mean, I'm not allowed to enter into, and I have not entered into any conversations with any prospective student athletes. There are going to be student athletes that ask about what the NIL opportunities are whenever they're on their visit, right? But they're not allowed to engage with Garnet Trust in any form or fashion until they are a student registered on campus. Now, for guys that are already on your roster, which is a big part of this, is retention, then we are actually about to start that process right now of guys that are, the transfer portal opens up on December 4th. There are guys that we want to try to make sure that they stay Gamecocks, and the NIL is important to them. And so we're going to have those conversations with those student athletes probably before the Clemson game, to be honest with you, before the last game of the regular season.
Correct me if I'm wrong. In the state of Missouri, the General Assembly intervened and allows the coach to be a part of the negotiation between player and NIL or collective.
Yeah, and I don't know specifically what the statute says in Missouri. I do know that the coach can be more involved. I don't know to what extent. And then 2, that high school athletes that go to school in the state of Missouri, if they commit to a in-state institution, Missouri State, any of those in-state institutions, then they can go ahead and start receiving NIL dollars as soon as they commit to that
Incentivizes
school.
The kid to stay in state.
To stay committed and stay in state. That's correct.
Okay, walk me through. Let's think of a highly recruited player the Gamecocks have recruited, Nick Harbor. Right. Nick Harbor was a 5-star player, top 20 player in the country, depending on what rating agency you trust or believe. Nick Harbor shows an interest in South Carolina. Hypothetically, what does Garnet Trust do in regards to USC recruiting against Oregon, I think it's Carolina and Oregon were final 2s.
We're kind of the final 2, yes.
So how can Garnet Trust play a part in convincing a Nick Harbor to come to USC instead of Oregon?
Yeah, I mean, I think you have to lay out the NIL opportunities, right? The biggest thing about Nick Harbor is that we didn't have, or Oregon has a couple 5-stars, right? South Carolina on the roster right now does not have a single 5-star except him. Spencer Rattler would be considered in that category, but he wasn't recruited as a 5-star. Transfer. A recruited 5-star. He'd be the first one since Jordan Birch. I think that NIL opportunities were presented to him as there's business opportunities in Columbia. Columbia's in the capital city. I mean, you're going to school in the capital city. They have an idea of what they can potentially make. But they don't enter into a contract with the collective. They don't sign any kind of NIL deals with anybody associated with the school until they get on campus. So like Nick Harbor, he committed and signed his letter of intent in February. We didn't Garnet Trust entered into agreement with him in June or July whenever he got on campus.
A kid that's already here. You talked about maintaining a roster, keeping a roster intact, keeping a roster in place. Is there coordination between the football staff and the collective? Is that legal?
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, we have gone through with Coach Beamer and Taylor Edwards, who is the director of player personnel. We will work with them to figure out what guys we need to make sure we keep. They're in that building. They understand if a kid is maybe unhappy with some of the NIL opportunities he's gotten, or lack of NIL opportunities that he's gotten, or if they feel like they have a better fit at another school. I think that there are guys on the roster that know that they might be a better fit at another program, and they might choose to just go into the transfer portal, not from an NIL opportunity standpoint, but just because they want to play, or they want to get a different opportunity somewhere else, so they don't feel like they're being used correctly in the system. And that's the beauty of the transfer portal. I know there's some downsides to it as well, but if a kid doesn't feel like, I say a kid, a student athlete, a sophomore in college doesn't feel like he's being used the right way. Or the fact that he might want to move closer to home, or have a girlfriend back at home, whatever it may be, that he wants to move, then the transfer portal gives him that opportunity.
What about dissent in the locker room? You got a quarterback making whatever. You got a left tackle not making much at all. You got a right guard making very, very, very little. Is it in confidence, or when a player sign a contract with Garnet Trust?
They sign a contract with Garnet Trust, and they are typically paid out monthly.
Okay, they're not paid to play football.
That's correct.
They're paid for their name, image, and likeness.
That's right. So if they sign a contract, they have to do certain deliverables outside of them playing football.
Hypothetical would be what?
It could be shooting a commercial for No Stoplights with Ken Hart. It could be shooting a commercial for Mickey Finn's One Stop Party Shop. It could be going to volunteer at the Ronald McDonald House to serve food to families who their children are in the hospital. And so, each player has a different agreement. I'll give you an example. We did an Xavier Leggett football camp here in Florence, and we got a couple of guys from the football team. We got to put them in a bus and took them to Wilson High School, and partnered with Wilson High School to do a football camp. And we're able to bring a couple of the players. You teach the kids how to play football, some life skills. They get a signed T-shirt, all that kind of stuff. It's a good opportunity for the 50 to 100 kids that were out there that day. And so that's part of their hours and their commitment with Garnet Trust.
And there's a valid contract.
Yes.
What happens in case someone breaches the contract?
Well, if we breach the contract,
sure.
we don't
fulfill
our obligation financially, and we're liable for suit. It has to be settled in arbitration. For them, they are also liable for not fulfilling their contract. The biggest thing is that if they don't fulfill their NIL contracts, they can be turned into the NCAA. And so the NCAA would not prosecute, I guess would be the wrong word, but they could take action against that student athlete, or rule them ineligible for misusing NIL dollars.
Okay, Mark, when I agreed to kind of participate in helping us get some underpinning to the Garnet Trust collective, I called around to some friends at other schools that I happen to interact with and have friendship and a relationship with, and some schools have done a better job of keeping their word than other schools.
Yes.
What happens to some of those schools? What sort of reputational risk is there if collectives make promises and don't fulfill those promises? Is that happening in college football today? And are we worried about not being able to meet our obligations?
We are not worried about being able to meet our obligations at South Carolina. We feel very comfortable that we're going to be able to meet our obligations throughout the rest of the calendar and school academic year. We try not to overextend ourselves and make sure that we have the revenue sources committed before we. We might not always have the cash in the bank,
sure.
but you have the revenue sources committed before you make those contractual agreements with a player, or verbal agreements even sometimes with a player. But yeah, I think that's a real thing. I think there are going to be multiple schools in the conference. I think it could be half the schools in the conference don't meet their financial obligations. Now, I will say there's a caveat to that, right? Are they going to be liable? Is the collective going to be, a lot of these?
We don't know yet.
Right. And a lot of these schools have also done some of these verbal kind of agreements, right? Oh, we'll take care of you, right? I think at A&M, I'll give you an example. It was widely publicized and advertised in 2022 that their football team, give or take, was, as a whole, they were going to spend about $9.5 million on their football team from an NIL perspective. 6 months ago, a report came out that they really only spent about $4.5 million. And the caveat is that you had, some Texas oil guy say, I'll give every offensive lineman, $250,000. I'll give every offensive lineman $100,000, whatever it was, right? And then all of a sudden, time's come to write the check, and he says, well, I'm not paying for the fourth string offensive lineman. And so then all of a sudden, this 4-star offensive lineman who committed to Texas A&M decided that, well, one, he wanted to play because he was the third or fourth string offensive lineman. Two, he kind of felt like he got shafted on a little bit of an NIL deal. And so he transfers, goes to play at, let's call it Duke University, and he's the starting offensive lineman at Duke University. And all of a sudden, the Clemson Tigers want to know how Duke's offensive line got so good. Well, they're playing with a couple of Texas A&M talent because their coach came from A&M. And so all of a sudden, that's where we go back to the parity aspect of it. And I think that we've seen it have some negative impacts on some plays, on places, but I think it really has a more parity positive impact.
Let's go here because I've heard this a lot. As I interact in Gamecock Nation to talk to friends of mine who have financially contributed and emotionally supported, one of the concerns they have is there seems to be, I think it's better now, but in the very beginning, and I get it, I understand it, I might probably be the same way. The university has a fundraising mechanism within called Gamecock Club. You're kind of fighting for the same dollars. And early, it seemed to me that officials with the Gamecock Club and within the athletics department were afraid that if Mark and Ken convince someone to give to Garnet Trust, they may give less to the university. I've always felt that the General Assembly could supersede some of the judgment. NCAA is a sanctioning body. It's not a damn lawmaking organization. I've always felt it's in all of our best interests. Maybe the university agrees, maybe it doesn't. I don't work for the university, so I can say this. But I've always felt it's in all of our best interests to allow people who make contributions to Garnet Trust to receive some credit that helps them climb the ladder of better seats, better parking. Is that something the university would consider? Is that a conversation that they're having? I understand, and I hate to use the word fiefdoms, but you've got one. I've got one. I got a list of sponsors here for the podcast. We're talking about, money's the answer. Now, what's the question? So, in essence, has the university been willing to engage in conversations, allowing folks who make contributions/donations to Garnet Trust to receive some sort of benefit relating to the Gamecock Club or USC athletics?
Yeah, those conversations are ongoing. Obviously, we're always trying to...
Is it illegal to do that via the NCAA stipulation?
Well, as you mentioned, the NCAA is not a lawmaking organization, so they may consider it against their rules, but a lawmaking body supersedes those rules. And so Texas, Missouri, a couple of these other schools have made some laws within their state that make it a little bit more friendly to the institutions within their state. And I think that if something like that were to happen in the General Assembly, it'd be favorable to Clemson and Carolina. And so I do think that it allows for the lawmakers not to really have to pick a side or anything on that issue. I think that something like that could be beneficial. I think those conversations are happening. I think they're happening in the aspect that we're always looking for a way to not always have to go to the fans again and ask for more money, and try to figure out a way to give them a little bit of benefit for their support of the NIL collective.
Has the University of South Carolina accepted the importance of NILs?
Yes, without a question. They understand that, listen, if we don't have a good athletics program, which good athletics programs, as we all know, are based on the Jimmies and Joes and not the X's and the O's, then we're not going to have people that are signing up to join the Gamecock Club. We're going to have less people that are filling into football and basketball arenas, and football stadiums and basketball arenas and baseball stadiums. And those are the revenue generators. So they understand, the Gamecock Club is important to them, but TV contracts and ticket sales and concession sales are a big part of it. And you're not on primetime TV at 8 o'clock on ESPN or ABC or CBS unless you've got a good football team.
Garnet Trust has a board.
We did.
Garnet Trust has 2 employees.
That's correct.
Yourself and Jeremy Smith.
Yes.
The 2 of you, I got to believe, are in constant communication with the football staff. How often and periodic do you interact with a Ray Tanner, a Chance Miller, a director of the Gamecock Club?
Yeah, so we meet with the athletic administration every 2 weeks. So Jeremy and I sit down. We kind of talk about what we've got coming up, pledges that we've got, and there's that aspect that, they've got folks that they have relationships with. I've got folks that I have relationships with as far as fundraising goes, as far as planning and strategic ideas. If you're a Gamecock fan, you may have come to a couple games this year. You may have seen there's a Garnet Trust ad that plays throughout the game, a couple of different times throughout the game. And so we strategize about how we can benefit the collective more, which obviously in turn benefits the university.
Is it fair to say, and this is where I probably get in my own way, but I'm kind of known for that. I believe that in the world of NIL, where there's some things left unknown, we don't know. You just said a second ago, Missouri. I think the Missouri General Assembly did something that you could argue is in violation of the NCAA requirement. I'm gonna throw a hypothetical, and you tell me if we could do this and who would make this determination. If Mark Bonnoitt, Jeremy Smith, the chair of the Garnet Trust Board, Ray Tanner, Shane Beamer, the president of USC, a board member or two agreed in principle that we're going to take a certain percentage of TV revenue and allow that money to be added to the kitty of NIL, could we do that? Is there an interest in collaborating? In other words, I'm coming up with a hypothetical here. Let's say that Mark Bonnoitt raises $3 million this year. If the General Assembly passed a law, could, at the university's discretion, they decide to match that $3 million and have a total NIL funded with $6 million?
Right now, no, they can't. I mean, they're not allowed to use university assets, university dollars.
But I added a caveat. If the General Assembly acted, you're not asking the General Assembly for additional funds. You're simply asking them for some clarity and guidance. Is that something we should consider, Mark?
I think it's something that it's revenue sharing is what it would be considered.
But aren't we heading there? I mean, there's a lawsuit in California.
I think, it depends on what the courts decide.
Sure.
And it depends on if lawmakers decide to get involved before the courts do. But I don't know revenue sharing is great. The only concern that I have about revenue sharing, and we can go back to your question in just a second, but the only concern I have about revenue sharing is it just gives everybody a new zero. If we said to everybody in the conference, okay, you're going to get 10% of your contract revenue, which I think next year it's going to be $65 million and 2 years it's going to be $75 million, give or take. And, say, okay, we're going to give everybody in the conference $7.5 million or 10%, $7.5 million to your collective. Then that, unless they cap it, which I don't foresee that happening.
But the NFL's got a salary cap.
They do, but they're controlled by the NFL.
Correct.
And, but for me to sit here and but let me say this, they have a salary cap, but Aaron Rodgers can still go out and do as many Pepsi ads as he wants to and get paid a heck of a lot of money outside of his contract.
Fair enough.
Right. So then all of a sudden you're going to come to Tennessee and say that Nico, who's going to be their quarterback next year, can't do any more deals outside. I mean, that gets into the whole area of where we just were, where you're telling athletes where you can't do that. But it gives everybody a new zero.
Okay, but are you not concerned? And here's my concern. The NIL, the Ed O'Bannon case changed the world forever. Student athletes or not. I mean, historically, it's been uncompensated athletic performance as part of your educational experience. You earned that scholarship by playing a game. The O'Bannon case changed that. It looks to me like, when I read some of the language in the revenue sharing case in California, I think they're going to side with revenue sharing. If we start down that road, revenue sharing could open the door to collective bargaining, to the student athlete being an employee of the university. Did we pay him for overtime or not? Can they organize and create a players union or not? To me, the collective could be the layer of insulation. If the university decided to match the money that Mark raises, and we got that, you got a pot of money, the university contributes to that pot of money, you disperse that money to the player, they're not technically going to pull with the university because the university doesn't compensate. The collective does.
Right. They'd be an employee of the collective or a 1099, payment of the.
But surely we've got to start considering that.
Oh, absolutely. You got to consider it because, you got to look at sustainability too. Can you keep going back to the same donors over and over and asking for more money? And that's something I struggle with every day. And I will probably dive into a little bit. But Garnet Trust has done Jeremy specifically has done an outstanding job of trying to find additional sources of revenue outside of just me begging donors for money. And that, there are a lot of different things that we've got a partnership with a beer, Steel Hands Brewery in Columbia. We've partnered with them for Sandstorm Game Day Lager. We get 20% of the profits from that beer. And that's going to be probably close to a six-figure deal for us this year. And so those are the kind of things that help, compensate additional revenue. But no, I agree. I think revenue sharing is absolutely on the table. You brought up a point that you think a judge is probably going to rule in that favor. You've got to realize it is a California judicial circuit.
That's exactly what I'm thinking.
And it goes to, but it will go to a Supreme Court, a Court of Appeals, down that road. And so that answer probably doesn't come for a couple of years. And hopefully that gives some time for the whether it be federal government or state governments to institute some kind of differing rules that allow the Constitution to say, or the judges to say, here's the law, and you got to make sure the law follows the.
Mark, I tend to be blunt, and you and I've talked about this, and I'll put it on camera. There's no reason Ole Miss has a better NIL than we do. What about Ole Miss? What did they do right to begin with that got them ahead of the 8 ball? I said earlier, and I'll say it again. Texas and Texas A&M are going to be unique animals. Michigan and Ohio State are going to be unique animals. Huge alumni, huge university, a very fluent fan base. But we're not a little poor school in a little poor state anymore. We've kind of convinced ourselves that that's what we are. We are not that, and we can't accept that as normal. What did Ole Miss do so well to be as effective early on in an NIL world?
Ole Miss did a couple of things. One, they got Walker Jones, who's running it, who does a great job. He's a former player for the Ole Miss Rebels, had been in the sports agency world a little bit before this. And then got into the collective side of things, and they were probably in a very similar spot that Garnet Trust was, I'd say, 18 months ago. And they went on a year-long kind of tour around the state, and kind of did well. I mean, they raised money, but they more of an educational process, which we've kind of been doing this year. I mean, you know that I've been at events across South Carolina, just trying to talk about this kind of stuff.
I've been to several with you.
Yes, and so. They did that kind of process, and then as 2022 ended a little bit, then they ended on they started out 8-1. I think they ended up 10-2. In the regular season, maybe 11-2 after they won a bowl game, top 15, 10 team in the country, and the school. A state over named Auburn University, who we've known for a while, has always had donors that have been willing to do whatever it takes to win. They were interested in Lane Kiffin, and Coach Kiffin made a comment in a press conference in December of 22 and said, I might consider going to Auburn if I can get, if I feel like I can get some more NIL support. I think that their monthly membership tripled at Ole Miss in their collective in like 10 days. I mean, I don't know the exact numbers, but it went from 2,000 to like 7,000 quickly. And so I don't necessarily know that I want Shane Beamer to have a hot season and all of a sudden say he's going to leave, because I don't want that to happen. But I think that Coach Kiffin has kind of embraced a little bit of that. They are the Rebels, but he's kind of embraced a little bit of that Rebel culture. They're a school that has not necessarily had more success than South Carolina. I mean, they've won a couple championships back in the day under Johnny Vault back in the day. But they have a little bit more of that, I don't know, that SEC culture. I mean, you got to think, we feel like we've been in the fight, and because of our strength of schedule for the last 30 years in the conference. Ole Miss has had to play LSU, Auburn, and Alabama every year since the end of World War II. And so we can't sit here and on top of that, they've got a big Power 5 aggressive school just like we do in our state in Mississippi State. And so as much as Gamecock fans want to complain about sometimes our strength of schedule, Ole Miss has not been far behind for a lot longer. And they have understood they've got to be a dedicated, invested fan base to be able to be competitive long term.
You mentioned you come from politics. I do as well. The majority of politics of today is dominated by the George Soroses of the world, the Koch brothers, the Peter Thiels, the super PACs, and the mega donors. Do you believe the more sustainable model is to go to our wealthiest donors again and again and again and again to get large sums of money again and again and again and again, or trying to do the Bernie Sanders model by finding smaller donors who will consistently give smaller amounts of money? Is that a more predictable and sustainable revenue stream?
I told you, if we get 77,000 Gamecock fans, which is what we hold in Williams-Brice Stadium, to give $10 a month, I mean, I think every single one of them could probably afford to give $10 a month if they're going to football games on a regular basis.
How many season ticket holders do we have?
There are, I think we sell, I don't know how many season ticket holders. I think it's about 16,000. There are 44,000 season tickets sold every year. So of the 77, then 45 of them are committed season ticket holders. And those are at different levels, obviously, from a bleacher in the upper deck to a suite, on the 50-yard line. But that would give you almost nearly $10 million of revenue. That would put us in the top 3 or 4 in the conference.
How do we convince the casual fan, the average fan? I'm not talking about you or I. It's unhealthy how much I love Gamecock football and the frustration that I've endured as a lifelong fan. But how do we engage that audience? I mean, you and I have traveled at times together, and we've spoken to big donors. And we thought to begin with that was the best way. It seems to me in our recent conversations, you've evolved into another way of thinking. You believe the better way to generate the money necessary to allow Beamer to be competitive year after year after year is to find 50, 60,000 people willing to write a $10 a month check. How do those people do that? How many of those people know about Garnet Trust? How many of those people understand the significance of a $10 contribution every month?
Yeah, I mean, and they don't. I mean, and we've got to do a better job of continuing to do grassroots fundraising and getting out, and that's a big part of us advertising at the stadium. We've had a significant increase in growth since we've been able to do that and just have that brand recognizable, as Garnet Trust is synonymous with Gamecock athletics right now. But it takes time. I'm not expecting it to happen overnight. I don't think my evolution has totally changed. I think that you've still got to rely, and like you said, you compared it to super PACs. There's a place for the Peter Thiel in the world, and there's a place for Joe the plumber that can give you $5, right?
But you in particular, because it's not a job of mine, it's a hobby more so, and I'm a pain in your ass. But we know who those 200 or 300 people are. We don't know who those 70-some-odd thousand people are, or do we? And how do we cull that list? And how do we?
I mean, we're trying to continuously evolve that list. I mean, you got to find. We went up to New York City for an event to try to find the Gamecocks in New York City. They go to a Gamecock themed bar called the Mason Jar, and we came across people that lived there, worked there, went to school at South Carolina, moved back up there. Work on Wall Street, do some investment banking, probably do pretty well. They come to one game a year, and you got to kind of do a little bit of data mining, and that's why it's not an overnight process. Where you got to find those folks. I was introduced to I did some research and found a prospective donor who they didn't go to Carolina. They own an accounting firm outside of New York City, and they have a cockaboose. And they have a cockaboose because their son's a junior at Carolina, and the other son's a junior in high school, and he wants to come to Carolina. So they kind of feel that they're going to be here for the next 6 to 8 years, and so. Those are the kind of folks that we've got to continue to identify, and that they're in masses, right? I mean, we've got about 350,000 living alumni. You mentioned the season ticket holders. Our goal is from the get-go is if we could get 5,000 people giving $25 a month, which is an average. I mean, some people are going to give 10, some people are going to give 100. 5,000 people giving $25 a month, we would get to a point where we are raising anywhere between $1.5 and $2.5 million just from the low dollar. And then on top of that, you kind of supplement a little bit with some bigger donors, like you talk about the 200 to 300 people. They can write you a $5,000, $10,000 check, right? And then you got to find some of those sponsorship deals too, right? We got to go find a Snickers, we got to go find a home team barbecue, a Micky Fins, whatever it may be, that we can supplement that. I think 6 to 8 million is the number that we've got to get to.
What do you base that on? Why do we believe 6 to 8 million? Because I'm with you. I think that's the number. What do you? I mean, you've done some analysis.
Yeah, I mean,
why is that the number?
You look at what some of these guys or guys and girls cost across the board, or what they're requiring for them to stay. And like I said, I think the market corrects itself a little bit. But we've been fortunate. We've joined a group called the Collective Association. It's made up of 25 other collectives from other Power 5 schools across the country. We met in Nashville back in August with them. We met again in D.C. in September and October, doing a little bit of lobbying type stuff. But we kind of get an idea for what some of these other schools are. Some of these schools have published their numbers. Some of them haven't. And so you kind of get an idea for where some of these other schools are. Some of the schools that are on the high end, that they're there now. I don't know that they'll be there forever. if you're A&M and you go 7-5 again this year, can you go back and ask the same guy for another $1 million? I don't know. He's given it to you 2 years in a row, and you've gone 5-7 and 7-5. I don't know if he's giving you $1 million in year 3. Now maybe gives you 100,000, right? So I mean, maybe that number changes a little bit, but I do think the market corrects itself. And there's also a little bit on the NIL side of things, the true brand awareness. I mean, if a company does a deal, I know that Dr. Pepper did a deal with DJ Uiagalelei at Clemson last year, right? He's not there anymore. They didn't have a great year. He didn't have a great year in 2022. I don't think Dr. Pepper is doing a deal with DJ Uiagalelei again next year because it probably wasn't worth it for their brand value. And so, I mean, I think a lot of that stuff happens and corrects. I mean, like I said, the market corrects itself.
If you and I are right, and there have been promises made but not kept in college football world, there's got to be some disgruntled players. Let's play out another hypothetical. Because we're kind of, we don't know. There's not a lot of history here. I mean, we've done, how long have NIL's been around?
Since July of 21.
Okay, so we're in our third year of NILs.
Right?
I mean, it's a new thing. I mean, and a lot of people are learning as they go, and they're making mistakes. I mean, I know for a fact that schools have probably made too big a financial commitment to certain players and too small one to other players. But the NFL makes mistakes. I mean, first-round draft choices bust at times. Fifth-round draft choices end up being all pros at other times. It's an inexact science, a little bit like recruiting. You know, the 3-star makes an All-American team. The 5-star just doesn't pan out. But if you and I are right and our hunch and suspicions are correct, there are a lot of players out there that were made promises and the promise hadn't been kept. How important is having some sort of idea, how much money does Shane Beamer have and his staff have to go out, and I'll use the word, poach players from other teams that made promises and didn't keep those promises? Walk me through. I mean, Shane can't go see a linebacker at Florida and say, hey, I understand things didn't work out here. Here's what we're willing to. He's got to have some idea and confidence in what you guys tell him he can do.
And we are in that process of budgeting right now.
Tell me as much about that as you're comfortable. The budgeting process.
Yeah, I mean, so we're trying to figure out what it's going to take to obviously the number one priority is what you've got to budget for guys on your current team.
So we've got a board, like a war room, and we've got safeties and cornerbacks and linebackers, and we've got allocations of funds for this position. It's a position of need. We don't need to spend a lot at wide receiver because we got these two. I'm just saying we got these two coming back. Our offensive line, we got to go find 2 stars. So walk us through the interaction you have with the staff and how you bring a degree of confidence that if they go make these promises, they can meet the obligations.
Yeah, I mean, that's the biggest thing is that, once we kind of figure out what it's going to cost to keep the guys on our team that we need to get an NIL deal with. And we work through that, right?
That's the first priority.
That's the first priority is retention.
The kids that are already Gamecocks that we want to keep on the roster.
We want to make sure that they have no interest in leaving at all, and we want to make sure that their NIL capabilities are as bound as possible at South Carolina. Then we kind of get that number, right? And then on top of that, then we can hopefully formulate based on what our budget projections are for next year as far as revenue comes in. We can go to Coach Beamer and go to Coach Paris, go to Coach Staley, whoever it is, and say, okay, this is what I give or take think is available for guys that we need to get out of the transfer portal. Now, I mentioned we can't use those numbers as an inducement, right? But he understands. I mean, all the coaches understand that for some people, NIL is a big priority. Some of those guys just want to play. There's a guy on our team that transferred from another SEC school this year who did not get what he thought he was going to get at that previous school. And to be honest with you, he didn't really ask for a whole lot whenever through his recruiting process because he just wanted to be a starting player. And he knew he could get that opportunity at South Carolina because I think he also understands if he can do that and excel here, then there's probably a lot more money down the road for him in the National Football League. But you have to have an idea of what that looks like. And so, biggest thing is retention. And then we'll say, okay, well, listen, we really need to supplement a couple more backup offensive linemen. I kind of have an idea what a backup offensive lineman would probably cost in NIL dollars. And so we kind of, because like I said, though, it's not pay for play. So, I mean, they're not getting this money just because they're coming to South Carolina. They have to do things outside of that. We don't enter into an agreement with that person until they get on campus. And so we'll kind of have an idea for that. And then the second thing is are there going to be some freshmen that you want to have some brand value? The reality is, you brought up Nick Harbor earlier. Yeah, before he even took a snap of football at South Carolina, he probably had a bigger brand awareness and could help Garnet Trust or Garnet Trust Foundation raise more money just because of his name. I mean, there were businesses that were beating down the door to reach out to us because he's a 5-star top-end athlete. He might be a guy that probably runs in the Olympics in a couple of years, not next year, but in 28. And one of the fastest guys in America. and he's still learning how to play his receiver position a little bit, but he's getting a lot. I mean, he's made tremendous strides in 10 games. And so, but he had more, brand awareness than even, somebody who's been on the team for 4 or 5 years. And so, we got to make sure we take care of some of those freshmen once they get on campus, because they offer a lot of brand awareness and marketability.
What is a typical deal worth, Mark? I mean, I've heard, this quarterback at this school gets $5 million, and that quarterback at the other school got a half. I mean, some of that I believe, some of that I'm highly speculative of or highly suspicious of. But I mean, without going into detail about this player and this amount of money, what is a typical arrangement like?
Yeah, I mean, I would say that the average starting Power 5 football player is probably making in the neighborhood of $50,000 a year.
Is that fair in your mind? I mean, to me, that's what we're getting. My theory is this, and you've heard me say this over and over and over again. The reason we're here is the NCAA chose to not give an inch. And if you don't give an inch, sooner or later you give a mile. And I do believe the pendulum has swung too far. And some kids are getting outrageous amounts of money, and they're not worth that sort of money. How long does it take for that to find some degree of equilibrium? Do you think we're heading there?
I think it's probably pretty close. Because now you're in year 2 of doing this, where you've paid some of these guys a little bit, and you got to find out whether it's worth it or not. But it's all about marketability too, right? I mean, how much does a X player help that collective raise more money? How much does that player help X business make more money? There's a business here in Florence that did a deal with probably a future starting quarterback at South Carolina, and I think it worked out pretty well for them. There was a return on that investment. I think that store probably does it again in a next year. There might be more stores that want to do something like that. So that's a big determining factor, is what the marketability of some of these athletes are.
How supportive? Our highest profile player is Spencer Rattler. How supportive has Spencer been? I mean, I know he's got to deal with Garnet Trust. How supportive of the idea of Garnet Trust is Spencer? Take the money out of the equation. How much blood, sweat, and tears has he given to try and make Garnet Trust successful?
Let me tell you this. We did an event on Monday night, and he was 15 minutes early for the event. He was the first person to jump up and volunteer to do anything at the event. I mean, he has been, I know that Spencer has probably gotten some bad publicity sometimes for some of his antics when he was 17 years old on a Netflix show.
Who hadn't?
He has been he's an incredible leader. He's an incredible young man. And he's been excellent for the Garnet Trust. And we are very proud of our partnership with Spencer Rattler. And I suspect that Spencer will continue to support the Garnet Trust in either financially or, in videos or whatever it may be for years to come, as I think he will be a high profile player in the NFL.
Okay. Walk me through and once again, I mean, I think this is important. How many former players have been willing to support? How do we engage those former players?
Yeah, I mean, there have been a lot of former players who have been willing to do things for us. Not necessarily as much check writing, but we did some former players shot a video for us to help promote a beer that we've done with Steel Hands. We've had a couple players come back to some former events or some events that we've had that have helped us raise money. Steven Garcia has been really super helpful. Steve Tannehill's been super helpful. Ryan Brewer's been really helpful. Mark Slattimore serves on our board. Actually going to see Marcus tomorrow. He's in Columbia this week. And so those are just a few. But there have been a ton of players that have been supportive in that aspect. I'd love to get some guys that want to write a check, obviously. But it's a work in progress, because these guys look at it a little bit differently. I mean, yes, they love the University of South Carolina. University of South Carolina gave them some great opportunities, but they are but they didn't get any NIL dollars, and there's a lot of those former players that have not been super supportive of it, not supportive of the idea. Not that they don't like Garnet Trust or what we're doing, but they don't love the idea of NIL, but they'll come around to it.
Mark, when I talked to you a year ago, you were not encouraged. You sound a lot more encouraged now. I'm not pumping sunshine. I'm not selling Kool-Aid. You know me better than that. But you and I talked about every day a year ago, and I heard a lot of concern in your voice. I hear some optimism now. Why? Why are you optimistic about where we are juxtaposed to where we were?
Well, I feel like I know a little bit more about what I'm doing.
Sure you do.
Comparatively, and can handle a little bit more of the situations differently. But I mean, we're in a place right now. I mean, like, a year ago, there wasn't a guy in my position, right? And so, I mean, there were a couple guys that left.
We're flying by the seat of our pants.
And there were a couple of guys that left that probably would have stayed had we been able to have some of those initial conversations with them. And now we're going to have a conversation with everybody on the roster that's currently on the roster that's coming back next year that we can get an NIL deal with. We're going to have that conversation before the end of the regular season. And that's in a much better place than we were. Obviously you always say money's your answer. What's the question? And yeah, obviously we won't always want more money. But we're just organizationally, we're in a way better place. Our relationship with the school, we signed a partnership with the university to become the official NIL collective. That allows us to advertise pretty much unlimitedly at the stadium, put out signs, pass out flyers, wear stickers, whatever it may be, sell merchandise in the Gamecock Village, advertise at the basketball games, do all that kind of stuff. We're just in so much of a better of a place, and our membership has grown about 40% since you and I kind of started doing this thing as a hobby a year ago. But we've almost doubled our membership.
And I'll say this: we've talked together with about 6 or 8 others that kind of got in on the grassroots level of this. I don't know that we win if we raise $10 million, but if we don't support NIL, we're going to get our ass cut in college football. We just are. I mean, you're not going to win in today's world. And I go back to this idea, this concept, this debate. I don't like it. If you don't like it, then just, forget it. I mean, you're not going to win. I'm sorry. It's a new era. It's a new age. Kids are going to be compensated for their name, image, and likeness somewhere. And unless you choose to be a part of raising significant amounts of money, and I've said this in the political world, this, there's some people out there with a lot of resources, and they're willing to write big checks. But every Gamecock fan who wants to win at football needs to be a part of an NIL. I believe that with every fiber of every Gamecock fan that wants to beat Clemson needs to write Garnet Trust a check for $10, $100, $1,000, $10,000, because we ain't whooping them if we don't fund an NIL.
And I mean, I tell this repeatedly over and over. Everybody says, "Oh, well, I don't know if I can do that or what I can do." There's a spot for everyone. There's a one-time fee that you can join for $5. There is a spot that you can give me $10,000 a month if you want to. And there's a spot for everybody in between. And so you got to find what's comfortable for you. Obviously, I know for a lot of folks, they're super invested in the Gamecocks with tickets and parking spaces and tailgating and condos and traveling to games. I met a guy the other day spent 468 straight South Carolina football games. Hadn't missed one since the Notre Dame game in 1984. But he, but I mean, there's a spot for everybody. And so for the person that sits in the bleachers and goes to one game every 5 years, there's a spot for you. For the person that sits in the suite on the 50-yard line, there's a spot for you. And we've got to make sure there isn't oil coming out the ground in South Carolina, but we got a damn loyal fan base. And we've got to make sure that loyalty is shown through supporting Garnet Trust and NIL collectives.
And I'll say this, and I wanted you to kind of engage our viewers and listeners. You and I and your father and Rick Havocos and about 8 or 10 or 12 of us, we're kind of a little Gamecock family. We swap tickets, we swap parking spots, we tailgate together, we yell and cuss and fuss together. There are 1,000 little groups like that, 10,000 little groups like that. Some have resources, some don't. But if somebody wants to find out more, if they want you to come speak to a group, and get on your calendar some way, somehow, how do they do that?
Yeah. So one, obviously, if you want to join, then go to garnettrust.com. You can join for, like I said, you can join for a one-time donation of $5. You can join for $10 a month. There's levels all the way up to $1,000 a month. If you're interested, this is the biggest thing we didn't talk about. There's a tax-deductible portion of this. If you want to write a larger check, you're interested in giving a larger gift that is tax-deductible, that goes to the Garnet Trust Foundation. And we work with charities on a lot of that stuff, so the players are interacting with charities for those donations. And so you can do the Garnet Trust Foundation. If you want to have me come speak to your group, you want to come meet with me, whatever it may be, I can come meet with you. You can email me at mark@garnettrust.com.
mark@garnettrust.com. We're going to do this once a month. Gamecocks has agreed to be our sponsor. I would imagine you'll bring some other guests in here, and then we'll hopefully get some university personnel here. I mean, we're in this thing together. Mark can't do it by himself. I mean, I'm out of it. I'm on the periphery. You know, I'm drinking liquor watching football now, but Mark's working hard. Jeremy's working hard. They've got a board assembled, a very competent board, very loyal and dedicated Gamecocks. Got new ownership. So some things are happening there. And what makes me feel optimistic is the tone of your voice now compared to a year ago, because you wondered if you hadn't bitten off more than you could chew. It's getting better. I mean, it really and truly is. And Gamecock fans, I think Mark will admit we were behind. I mean, there's no doubt about it. Doesn't matter whose fault it is. I could care less about whose fault it is. Point fingers doesn't fix anything. But we're catching up. And we're organizationally creating an enterprise or entity that will raise sufficient money to allow Shane Beamer to go out and get players, keep players, that makes us more competitive in the future. That's why you get up every morning.
And it's a sustainable model. And that's what I'm most proud about is, I think we're going to get to a point where I don't have to worry about if a check comes in that next month or not to make payroll, right? We're going to have different streams of revenue that allow us that we can budget correctly. We can make sure that we're making our promises to our players, and then we're going to have enough resources for all of our coaches at South Carolina to be competitive.
And you and I agree. Guys, I'm telling you, if you give to Garnet Trust, we may not win. I mean, there's a chance that we don't win. But if you don't, there's zero chance we do.
That's right.
I can assure you of that. Thank you, my man.
Go Cox.
Go Cox.